Hi YouTube, it's Princess Diamond. Welcome back to my channel. So today we'll be taking a deep dive into how to part for small knotless braids. This is for my beginners, so I will be taking it slow, so just bear with me on this video. But I'm going to first start out with the tools that you'll need, which will be a rat tail comb, some sectioning clips. You're going to want the small ones as well as the big ones. If you don't have the big ones, you can also use scrunchies or hair ties, and then you'll also need shine and jam or some type of braid gel. So first I'm starting with sectioning the hair into manageable parts because starting with a large section can be overwhelming. So to start, I'm creating a middle part straight from the front of her head to the back, and this is going to create a symmetry for the rest of the process. For the purpose of this video, I'm going to call this parting a base part, where my parts are not necessarily perfect or clean. This is just my starting guide. So for this base part, you want the front to be centered. So this part right here, I'm using the center of her nose to get the center part. Now for the rest of the parts going down, you don't necessarily, it doesn't have to be perfect. Of course, get it as nice and centered as you can get it, but don't focus too much on this middle part. So now her hair is parted in half. I'm going to part it again to create 4 quadrants. So using the end of the rat tail comb, I'm placing it right where the top of her ear is and creating a part going straight across. Now this is another base part. So again, right now we're not focusing it on it being nice and clean. We're just using this as a base. And this part is going to go from ear to ear. So I'm doing the same thing on the other side, and then I'm connecting the 2 parts. So now I have my 4 quadrants. So this is going to make parting more manageable rather than trying to create small parts in a very large section. And for these big sections, that's when you want to use your hair ties or your large clips to separate and keep the hair away and in place. So now I'm going to work on just this bottom back section. And in this section, I'm going to create 3 rows going straight across from ear to ear. I'm using the end of my rat tail comb as a guide on where I'm going to place these parts to make sure that they're going to be evenly spaced apart. So that's just a tip. Before you actually create your part, you can use the end of your rat tail comb to see where you kind of want to put it. Now the first part that you're doing, this is the base part. Remember, the base part is where it's not clean, it's not perfect. This is just where we're starting from. Now after I've created my base part and I like where it's at, I'm going to use this shine and jam and I'm going to apply it to my parts. And then afterwards, I'm going to go in and clean up my parts. This is going to help me get a more precise, clean line. So now this parting, again, for the purpose of this video, we're going to call it the clean parting. Now I'm creating the clean parting. And when you're doing your clean parting, you want to make sure that you are taking your time. So go back in as many times as you need to and fix that line. Make it straight. Get a nice, clean part. Now we're on our first row. For my first row, I typically do 5 braids. Since 5 is an odd number, that means there's going to be 1 braid in the center. And how I figure where that braid will be centered at is by still creating a middle part and then creating parts on each side of that middle part. Now there's my base parting for the braid that's going to be directly in the center. And since we're doing 5 braids, we're going to do 2 additional braids or parts on both sides of that. And all of the parts should be the same size, and that's how I know I have my braid in directly the center. So if you have to, you can just go back and repart just to make sure everything's nice and even. But there is my 5 braids in my first row. So now I am in my second row. I'm going back to that bottom section that I was working on. And since I said that we're doing 3 going across, now we only have 2 more rows left to do. So I am starting out with creating that middle part. And again, you see me using the end of the rat tail comb to go directly straight across. I'm doing the same thing on both sides from ear to ear, and I am connecting that base part. And once I'm looking at it, you know, making sure that when you're parting, you can take a step back, look at it from different angles, turn the chair around. Once I'm looking at it and I see and I like where the placement of that, that's when again I'm going to use my Shine and Jam on that part, and then I'm going to then create my clean part. And this is the part that I want it to be nice and straight. This is the part that is going to this is the part that's going to stay. So make sure that I'm creating it nice, straight, clean, and taking my time, going back over it if needed. Now once you have your clean part for your second row, now we're going to go into doing the brick layer parting. Using the center braid as my guide, I'm going to create a part directly in the middle, in the center of that center braid going straight up. And then all of my parts are going to be in the center of the braid below it. Now, I was showing you guys where I was placing the part with the end of the rat tail comb, but don't forget you can also use that as a guide on where you're going to place your part. So if you're not sure, you don't want to get to parting right away, use that end of the rat tail comb to figure out if that's a good spot where you want to place that part and if it's going to be even if you place it there. And then create your base parting. Then you go back, clean up your part, and then you have your clean parts. And this is the second row. So for the second row, you're always going to have one additional braid more than your first row. So this second row has now 6 braids. Now I'm at the very last part of this back section, and I'm recreating my baseline because I figured I don't want it to be so high. So that's the good thing with the base parting. It's not exactly where you're going to end up. It's just a guide, right? So you can still go back and change it, and that's why you're not going to put any product when you're just doing your base parting. So now I figured out where I want my base parting. Now I'm going to add in my Shine and Jam and clean it up because now this is going to be my final part and I want it to be nice and clean. So again, I'm still keeping that part right above the top of her ear, going directly from ear to ear straight across. So this is now my third row. That third row is going to be one more additional braid than the second row. So this third row has 7 braids. I continued with the brick parting, same as the second row. So now we've done our bottom 3 rows. We've completed the bottom section, and now we're going to go to the top. And I forgot to mention how I determine my small knotless braids. So for my small knotless braids, I go by the number of rows. So typically my small knotless braids will have 9 rows. 3 from the ear down, that's what we just completed right here. And from here on up, we're going to do an additional 6. So remember, we don't like working in large sections, so we're going to split this up again. So right where that part is in the back of her ear, we're going to create a part going straight up. This is just going to be a base parting, so don't worry about it being perfect. But you're going to find the top of her head, and that's where you're going to part up to. Don't spend too much time on this parting. Again, it does not need to be perfect. This part is not even going to stay. We're really just using this as a guide, or more so as a way to split up that large section so we can work, so it can be a little bit more manageable to work through. So again, this is where you're using your big clips to kind of put away the hair. So we're going to do the exact same thing on the other side. We're going to connect it. You can start literally from here and connect it going down, or you can do the exact same thing. We're starting from the ears going up. Just make sure you're connecting the 2 parts. Okay, so once we have that, now we're back to our 4 quadrants. Again, more manageable, baby steps. We want to make things simpler and easier to work through. So now we're going to work with one section at a time. So as I said earlier, this top section is going to have 6 rows. Instead of trying to figure out where everything's going to go right away, let's split that in half. So we're going to split, we're going to create a base part in the center of this, and we're going to focus on 3 rows at a time, okay? And so how we can determine that this is centered is by using that rat tail comb to kind of measure from the center part to that new part that we had created, and then from the new part to the end. Some common mistakes that people make is that the rows end up being slanted. So you see these 2 rows right here, they should not be crooked. They should be exactly parallel to each other. So although this is still a base part, this is still your guide. So you want to make sure that it doesn't have to be perfect right now, but you want to use it as a guide. So make sure that these lines are straight and going parallel to each other, and make sure one is not slanted to the other. So now see, these two are parallel. By the way, as you're braiding, that's when you want to use these little clips to put it away. I did not show any of the braiding process in this video, but yes, that's when you want to use the little clips. So same thing as I did in the bottom section, I'm kind of using the end of the rat tail comb as a guide on where I'm going to place these next 3 rows to make sure that they're even, to make sure that they're equal, and that they're going straight, right? So doing the same thing that I did in that bottom section. And then I'm just going to continue basically just connecting it with all 4 of the parts that I originally did. So now I'm just creating that base part, connecting it, going all the way across to the other ear. So essentially you could have done all of your parts, all of your rows going straight across from ear to ear without separating the hair into those 4 smaller parts, right? Those 4 smaller parts, they help you as a guide. They help you to work in more manageable sections. They help you to create the parts straight so they're not crooked, and they help you to create it so it's even. So breaking it down into those 4 smaller parts are going to help you significantly, especially as a braider. Now, as you guys can see, I had already done the part on the other side, and then I just connected the 2 going straight across from ear to ear, and then I cleaned up my parts. So continuing with the brick layering, I like to start out with this first braid that is right next to her ear. So go to the center of that braid and then create that part going up. Again, same thing like I did with the other ones, but this is where I like to kind of start, because then I can try to figure out how many boxes or how many braids I'm going to do on this left side. So on the front section, how many braids I can get to fit in this section. So I determined that I would be able to fit 3 braids in this front section right here. On the right side, I'll do the exact same thing. So the braid right next to her ear, I'm going to do the same thing and keep the same amount of braids. And then of course, the braids in the center are going to be easy because I'm just going to continue with that brick layering all the way across. So for this 4th row, I did do a total of 12 braids. Your goal with this is just to keep things even. So what you do on the left side, do the same thing on the right side. What you do on the right side, do the same thing on the left side. So as you see, I did the 3 braids in the front on that left side. And then if you see right here, there's 3 braids in the front as well. And you can see that parting that goes in the middle of that braid that's below it, right next to her ear. Yep, so again, keeping the same thing, just making sure everything's even on both sides. All right, so now this is going to get a little repetitive, but I do still want to show it because I know I have my beginners watching. So I'm going to show you guys the next row. And also I do want to mention that I am going to show you guys every row and how many braids on each row. So make sure to watch this video all the way through. But yeah, so now we are still on that section, and I just created another part going straight across and doing the same thing. I'm connecting the parts. Make sure you're taking your time also. If you're a beginner, get a friend, get your mom, get your sister, get your auntie, get your grandma, get somebody who will allow you to take your time and do this as many times as you need to. You're not going to get the perfect part your first try. You might, and that's great, but maybe not every single time, right? So you're gonna have to go over this a few times to get your part nice and clean. So get you a model, get someone who can be patient with you and allow you to take your time, especially if you're a beginner, until you've got this, you got the hang of it, and you can go a little bit faster. So as you guys can see, I did the right side, and then I moved on to the left side, and then now I'm just connecting that part together. All right, so this is my base parting, and again, same thing, I'm going to apply my Shine and Jam, and I'm going to clean up that part. And now this is my clean part. This is the part I've went over a million times, and this is the part that I like that I'm going to stick to. And now I'm figuring out where I'm going to put my brick parts. So again, I'm going in the center of the braids below it, going straight up. And for this now 5th row, we have 13 braids. And then this is the 6th row, and the 6th row has 12 braids. At this point, I've done my 3 rows in that first section. Remember when I split it? So now I'm going to do work on my last and final 3 rows. But before I continue, I am going to just double check and make sure that my middle part is centered. This is kind of like my last chance to make sure that I have a nice centered middle part, because from here on out, if it's not nice and centered, these next 3 rows are going to kind of be thrown off a little bit and not look so nice and even. So now that I have my middle part nice and centered, now I'm figuring out where my next 3 rows, or my last 3 rows, are going to go. And again, using that rat tail comb, we're doing the same exact thing. Nothing has changed, nothing's different. So now for this 7th row, we have 11 braids on this 7th row. I do want to mention, I'm giving you guys this just as a guide. Your amount of braids may be different. For example, this very front section on my client right here is baby hairs. I'm not going to force a braid on this section. It's going to be too much tension. Your client, though, may have adult grown hairs that you can add a braid to in this section. Therefore, instead of you having 11 braids, you may have 13 braids in this section. So again, just showing this as a guide, your numbers do not have to be the exact same. All right, so now we're down to the top of the head. We have the last 2 rows, which means we only have 1 more parting to do. And I've heard that this is where a lot of people struggle at with making this top like round part. It's still the same thing. So as you guys seen, I kind of just simplified it now that these sections are much smaller, and I just created 2 parts, right? So 2 sections. All right, so now I'm going directly in the center, and I'm just creating my part, and I'm just following the curve that's below it. So the part that I did right before, I'm just going to follow that same curve and keep this section or this parting, even and straight. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. And I'm just going to connect it. And again, I'm just checking to make sure that both sides are even and about the same amount. And then the curve, that U curve, is just following the same U curve that's underneath it. And then I use my Shine and Jam, again, repetitive, using my Shine and Jam, and I'm just going to create my clean part. Okay, so once you have that, your part should kind of look like this. I'm going to show you here in a second. Now, it should look like this. Just a nice, clean U part. And again, this part right here, this line, it should match up, or it should follow that same curve, that same line parting right below it. Okay, so I showed you guys I'm showing you guys the braids that I did on the left side. And once you do those braids, again, following the same brick layer parting, you're going to now connect the same parts on the right side. So remember how I said everything you do on the left side, you're going to do on the right side. Everything you do on the right side, you're going to do on the left side. So these lines are matching up. So from the center braid, you want your lines to match up. Everything else is brick layers. Just from the center braids, these 2 lines match up. And this is the final result. I don't know if I mentioned it, but my 8th row, which was my second to last row, had 10 braids. And then that final row that I did had 8 braids. That was the one that had 4 on both sides. So this is the final results. And again, these are my smalls. I do want to mention everyone's smalls are different. These are my smalls, and I based them off of the amount of rows. My smalls, again, have 9 rows total. That's 9 rows going straight across from ear to ear. So again, I do understand that everyone's size parting can be different. Some people can look at this and say, absolutely not, these are mediums. Some people can say these are medium, but these are my smalls. And then just to recap all of the rows, my first row had 5 braids. That was the very first row on the bottom. My second row had 6 braids. My third row had 7 braids. My fourth row had 12 braids. Fifth row had 13 braids. My sixth row had 12 braids. My seventh row had 11 braids. My eighth row had 10 braids. And my ninth and final row had 8 braids. That was the center one where we did 4 on each side. So altogether, I had 84 braids for my small knotless braids. And if you watch my other parting tutorial where I did my medium-sized knotless braids, you'll see that I had a total of 7 rows. And for those, I did about, I think, 55 braids. So that just goes to show like the difference in like the sizing and the braid amounts for each part. So one more tip is you can use this as a guide in figuring out how long it'll take you to do small braids. So practice doing one braid and figure out how long it takes you to do one braid. So let's say it takes you 5 minutes to do one knotless braids. Multiply that by 84, or you can round up 85, and that's going to tell you how long it'll take you to do 85 braids. So that's about, how long it'll take you to do small knotless braids. You can add in maybe say 20-30 minutes for parting. That'll give you a time frame of how long it's going to take you to do your small knotless braids. So example, 5 minutes to do one braid. So 5 times 85 braids, that's 425 minutes. So that's roughly about 7 hours. Add in about 30 minutes for parting. It's going to take you about 7.5 hours to do small knotless braids. Now, if it takes you a little bit longer to part, that may go up to 8 hours. Do the same thing for medium. Again, for my mediums, I typically do around 55. So again, if it takes you 5 minutes from start to finish to complete one braid, times 5 by 55, add in a little cushion for parting, 20-30 minutes. That's going to tell you about how long it's going to take you to do medium-sized braids. So now if you say, okay, it takes me about 7.5 to 8 hours to do small knotless braids, you can figure out what you would charge for a 7.5, 8-hour shift. Comment below if you would be interested in me doing a full video on how to determine your pricing. I think if I get enough people to comment, then I'll go ahead and do that. But I hope you guys enjoy this video. I hope it helps. I'll talk to you guys in my next one. Stay blessed, stay protected, stay filled with love and peace.